Welcome back, and thank you for joining me for the third installment of the value series, where I discuss all the ways that I have overcome being devalued, either by society, by peers, or by family. And so the list is long, and so I'm breaking up the ways that I have been devalued into segments. And my hope is that you all that are resonating with this can take these things and you can apply them to your own life and how you can overcome some of the ways that you've been devalued, or you can identify the ways that you have been devalued and work to overcome. So at the end of this video, there is a playlist that I have pinned for the value series. And also I will pin my my Who is Tasha Jackson playlist, because it'll give you some additional information about me and my life, and kind of who I am and why I'm doing this. And so this particular value series is inspired by a guy who works at a local guitar store, named Randall. And Randall and I were having a conversation one day, basically discussing kind of, all of the ways that he had been devalued as a child of the 80s, all the ways I had been. And so all of these videos are kind of discussing those. I came home after that and I was like, I should make a list. And it's a pretty lengthy list. And so I'm hoping that you're finding inspiration, you're finding value, and you're finding a way to overcome your own challenges in your own life. So in the last video, I talked about St. Louis being very the city itself being purposefully designed, like the city plan is purposefully designed to divide the city between race and class. Where I lived in St. Louis, I was devalued. My age, especially as an adult, as I got older, it doesn't matter how old I get, older people still devalue me by saying, like, what do I know? Like, and I'm sure that many of you have had that same experience. That the fact that I have a young face and kind of the troubles that come along with having a young face, which is strange, but this is what happens to me in my life. And then of course weight, how in the past it was, weight was not valued. Oh, one thing that I wanted to add that I forgot was I am so happy that nowadays you see, that's an old person saying nowadays, back then. So nowadays, you walk into any retail store and you see advertisements with lots of different body shapes. I go out into public and I see larger girls that are wearing tube tops. That is something you could never see whenever I was a kid or a teenager. If you were overweight, you hid your body. And now I'm so grateful and so happy to see so many different women embracing their body type and their body size. And I'm not a fan of corporations, but like if I see somebody doing something good, I'll call it out. So there was a commercial I saw the other day for Ulta, and they had like all of these different women in all of these different capacities, and they were saying like no matter what we look like, we can all embrace beauty, and beauty is different for everyone, and it's like it's beautiful to be different and unique, right? Like I agree with that. So kudos to companies that are finally like, let's change the narrative of what the standard of beauty is, because the standard of beauty whenever I was a kid and the standard of beauty now has shifted dramatically, and I'm so excited to see that. So continuing with the series, the next thing that I will discuss is being a single mom. So as a child of a single mother and as a single mother myself. So as the child of a single mother, I watched my mom be devalued, and I can't even tell you, like, because my mom didn't have a man. Yes, my mom later did get married and she was married to my stepdad, but before that, it was really difficult for her to try to navigate because again, we were living in like a time capsule of the past of if you were a woman and you didn't have a man around to do things for you, you couldn't do things. Women were not allowed in certain spaces. Women couldn't be heard in certain spaces. You didn't have a voice as a woman in certain spaces. And so if you were a single mom, it was like you were a whore, like you have a bastard child. Like, I mean, just listen, as culturally, like as much as I love the 90s culturally, like pop culture, the undercurrents of the culture were horrible. like like I would love to be a child nowadays. Not back then, definitely no. With just so many things, so many things. But so watching my mom being devalued as a single mother. And I was just like, you know, do you know what my mom does? Do you know how hard my mom fights for different things? And so it's from watching her, I learned how to, I don't want to say I learned how to, I knew that I could raise my two kids by myself. So when I divorced 7.5 years ago, I mean, I was planning to divorce before that. And then I had told people, and they were, again, you stay together for the kids. How are you going to take care of the kids by yourself? What are you going to do for them? How are you going to provide? Like, people, and this is another reason why I have become so private because a lot of people have opinions about my life that they know nothing about. And so I am the one that knows my life the best. And I know that I can make the best decision for myself. And if it's not the best decision, then I learn a lesson from that and I move forward. Right. And so, again, I very privately make decisions or I move forward in my life in a very private way. I rarely allow people to have an input anymore because in the past that having an input got me into a lot of trouble. Unnecessary trouble. So once I learned how to listen to my inner guidance, my inner self, my higher self, whenever I became more spiritually inclined, where I would pray and I would listen, I learned how to listen for the answers. Once I depended on myself and God, my whole life completely transformed. Okay. So when I was divorcing my husband at the time, my son had just turned 1 year old and my daughter was 3. And it was a lot of people trying to instill fear in me in order to stay with my husband because again, I was very strictly religious, and in a very strictly religious community, you don't get divorced, which many people would resonate with that. So, back then, if you were a woman, you didn't get divorced. If no matter what problems you were having, you didn't get divorced. If your husband left you, then, it was because you were horrible. I mean, even I know women that had gotten divorced and they were looked down upon, like the problem, like even though the woman left the husband, the problem was the woman, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. And so those were some of the things that I was dealing with whenever I got divorced. Was now I was being faced with being a single mom and having a lot of uncomfortable discussions within my peer circle about how I was going to raise kids by myself and kids need a father. And it's better for you to stay together, even though your husband is abusive, for the sake of the kids. And I'm here to tell you that all of that is false. Do not do that. You end up hurting the kids more if you stay together. I'm here as a testimony to tell you that if you are a single mom, you can do it. It's hard. Let me tell you, it's hard. It's really hard. You're exhausted. Your adrenal glands are overworked and completely shot, but it is absolutely possible to do it. And there's a video that one of my friends had sent me about especially minorities. Minority women are pros at being single moms because of broken homes, and like that's a whole other video series. However, the point here is that since I was a kid, the number of single moms has gone up because of other societal pressures and other ways that society is structured that has been an assault on minority men. Okay, so we'll just leave that at that right now. Back to the single mom thing. So when people, like when I first got divorced, people just automatically assumed that I was married. And then I would tell people that I was not married. And then because I had kids, they assumed that I was easy. So they just assumed that because I had kids and I was not married, that I was the type of woman that was very open to just having sex with a lot of different men, regardless of what the consequence would be. So this is one of the biggest challenges that I actually faced as a single mom, with some of the really lesser or immoral behaviors of some men also married that would approach me or have a conversation with me. Also, some of the things that would happen to me as a single mom would be people would just assume that because I was single, I was not educated. And I don't know or understand where that correlation happens in society or where it has happened in society, but it was a thing that was happening to me. And so, or maybe because they assumed that I was brown and not married, I was not educated. Because that is also a stereotype that has perpetuated throughout our society totally ridiculously. But it's a thing. Again, it's a remnant of the past, right? And so they just assume that I'm not very educated. And so I would have these problems with these companies. I'm actually going through a huge problem right now. And I would have to gather all of this evidence in order to advocate for my kids, or I would be taken advantage of because I was single and I needed, like in the daycare, I needed my kids to be in a daycare and I needed to go through a specific daycare because we were on government assistance at the time. And that was another thing too, being on government assistance, I was always devalued, regardless of my education level, regardless of my experience, regardless of the things that I was doing in my life. None of that mattered. The fact that I was brown and that I was on government assistance automatically put me in a space where I was being devalued, and I was a single mom on top of it. And it was just like essentially although my experience is different than the narrative and the stereotype, I was kind of lumped into that. Okay. And so that is those companies' biggest mistake, is that they can assume that I was not educated on processes and things like that. But also that anytime that I would have to file any complaints, they would be very shocked of the way that I would handle the situation or the way that I would come forward or something like that. And so, like, in a way, that was to my advantage, but at the same time, I should have never gone through that experience in the first place. That it doesn't matter what your color is, it doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your marital status. None of those boxes that you check on any of the forms matter. They really don't. right? Because everyone has a different experience and you can't pigeonhole people into boxes that that they say certain things or they do certain things or they have a certain education level or they're married or not married, and then I'm going to take that piece of paper and now determine what kind of person you are. I'm going to pass judgment on you based on your circumstance. Okay, so totally, like, if that is your story, especially as a single mom or even as a single dad, I have seen single dads also be devalued. Okay. So I've seen situations where like the dad is a widow and he is kind of like it's so strange because like as a widow, as a woman, the perception is so different than a man, right? Or if the mom was the one who left or was the problem in the relationship, right? Like there's no sympathy for the man, right? There's no like, for women, it's that the women are victims, but for the men to also have been placed in that situation, it kind of goes back to that, you know, be a man kind of thing. The man is a provider. So if the man can't hold his family together, then what value does he have? Or if the man can't fully provide for all the needs, then what kind of man is he? Right? Or, like these ridiculous ideas that come from the past that need to just like stay in the past. And so, again, even if you're a single dad, there are a lot of challenges that I have seen single dads go through. Oh man, especially one of my friends, he was in court with his ex-wife, and in a huge custody battle, and he was the one who was like, she was the one who was kind of the perpetrator in the situation. And it was like the judge would like not even listen to his side at all. I mean, completely devalued him. So let's just say if you're a single parent, you have judgments passed on you that are really that really create problems in society, and you're really devalued because of your single status, despite the fact that you're more than capable of taking care of your children. I've also been devalued because I was a monolingual speaker of English. So I have actually learned multiple languages, but not fluently. So I learned Arabic and I can still speak a lot of Arabic, but I don't know it fluently enough to have a conversation longer than just cordial. The same with Spanish, same with French. I learned Farsi and Turkish just because there are a lot of words in Arabic that are the same, have the same meaning. And so, I never learned how to speak fluently. Now, I was raised in St. Louis where it was really driving home English only education because, funny enough, St. Louis is an incredibly culturally diverse city, but it's very, very segregated. Every ethnic group has its own neighborhood in St. Louis. And again, I haven't been there in 10 years, so I can't speak to it. But there, when I left, it was still that way. And you have all of these neighborhoods that if you are not that race, you should not go there because the people are watching to see who's coming in and out of their neighborhoods. And that's essentially how they keep the neighborhood safe from hate crimes and things like that. Okay. Back in the day, especially. And so, it was really pushed English only, which is how, especially a lot of the immigrants, they would lose, like over generations, they would lose their own culture and they would lose their own language and their own value systems. So that's a way that those cultures have been devalued, right? And so moving to Arizona, where you really have to speak Spanish. Like, even if you can say please and thank you and ask where things are, or even just to say I don't speak English very or Spanish very well, like even just those things really goes a long way. It's really, really important. And so, a lot whenever I first moved to Arizona, I started looking for jobs and I couldn't get a job because I wasn't bilingual in Spanish too. And so it's really interesting. Now, let me take this, let me give you a little bit of a history lesson here. So, in the United States, it's for the most part English only education. There are specialty schools that they receive a specialty status in order to teach not in multiple languages. So, for example, my children, they attend a dual language school. So in their school has a very special status where they are allowed to teach or have instruction in English and in Spanish. So English is ELA and math, and then Spanish is history and science. And then if there's any other things that are happening in the classroom, in the Spanish classroom, then they're able to, um, speak in Spanish and things like that. And so across the country, there have been efforts to try to make this country English only, which the whole entire point of this country is that, we're a melting pot. We came all from somewhere else besides the indigenous people, right? We all came from somewhere else. We all have this knowledge. We all have this experience that has contributed to the foundation and growth of this country, but yet those other languages are not valued. Okay. So whenever you move to another part of the country, and before, here's another history lesson. This land was colonized by the Spanish and the Portuguese here in the West, but also like in St. Louis, it was colonized by the French all the way down to Louisiana, where a lot of those people still speak French only. They don't speak English. To the Appalachian Mountains, where those people speak whatever dialect that is not, it's not considered to be English. It's like a mix of whatever it was, whatever language they had previously till now. So there are certain pockets all over the country where people are still speaking the language from wherever they came from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, wherever their descendants, wherever they were descended from, right? None of those things go away. But what it's ended up doing, it has hurt a lot of people, especially in my generation, because we did not grow up in a bilingual or multilingual household where we could then go out and we could participate in the global society, because now it's not just the United States, it's now global, right? I interact in my business. I now interact with people from Canada and people from South America and people from Portugal and people from other European countries, people from Australia. There are a lot of countries that I work with, in addition to whenever I was a teacher, having a lot of exposure to indigenous languages, where if I had some knowledge of those languages, it really would go a long way. And so, yes, we pretend in this country that, we have French and German classes. Like, interestingly, in St. Louis, that's what was offered, was French and German, because that was the majority of the colonizers that were in that area, right? And immigrants that were in that area, and Italian, right? So it's really, really interesting that over time, other languages have been devalued, but now it puts especially my generation in a really difficult place where we can't fully participate within the global society because we only speak one language fluently.